Thank you, Noah, so much. And welcome back, friends. So while we were on our break, I got a message from Wendy Johnson, who teaches frequently at Upaya. And she made some notes that I just want to share to remind us of the territory that we traversed this morning. If you recall, Heather spoke to 3 ways that are so important for us to open up into the truth of suffering and also of the transformation of suffering. And she spoke to the importance of deep listening. So Wendy notes this, accountability, so important. And then she focused, often our energy is holding others accountable, but Heather spoke to another kind of accountability, which is self-accountability. And then Wendy made the note of the 3rd thing that Heather spoke to, and that was engagement. And she said, don't work or walk in what is not your ministry. It's just, that is so right on. Don't work or walk in what is not your ministry. And then Dekila talks about jagged evolution and the gift of misbehaving cells and praying for compassion while embodying it and practicing and learning together. So Wendy, it was so good to get this note from you. And I'm also reminded of something. This is a book that is coming out in August. It's called The Trail to Kanjiroba by a very great writer, William Dubuis. And in this book, which is so interesting, he highlights the work that we've done on the Nomads Clinic, but as a metaphor for using the clinic as a kind of platform for looking at our ailing earth. And in the introduction, he speaks, and this is what reminded me so much of Kritee's work around grief. He said, what he is learning about in this work is about finding grace amid the grief. And it is for us to really touch into, the truth of sorrow and anxiety that so many of us are going through right now, not as an experience to disable us, but actually, and this is from a beautiful piece by Terry Tempest Williams, where she talks about unraveling. And in it, she says, the entangled nature of undoing and becoming. So we're in this process of undoing and becoming. And she says, Terry Tempest Williams, I am unraveling. I am unraveling like a rattlesnake in the desert, tightly coiled, my tail issuing a warning I cannot decipher. My mind is unraveling as I move to free my thoughts from being held captive for too long in such a tightly wound space. And that's the opening lines of her essay. And then the end of that paragraph, what is waiting and wanting to come forth? What is waiting and wanting to come forth? So Kritee, I'm very grateful that you're here today. As a longtime Zen practitioner, but also as a climate scientist, and climate educator and activist, and also as someone who has been a grief leader around issues of climate devastation. And needless to say, it is beautiful to see a Zen priest bringing these different threads together to, if you will, unravel and then weave together a life that is sane and healthy for so many. And I want to thank you as a senior scientist in the Global Climate Program at the Environmental Defense Fund and for your work in implementing climate smart farming at scale in India. Just amazing, the work that you do on the ground, and also as a scientist, but also as a social activist. So thank you, Kritee. I'm grateful that you're here with us this afternoon, and please shine forth.
Thank you so much, Roshi Joan. It's an honor to be here. Hello, everyone joining from all parts of the world. That poem by Terry Tempest Williams that you just read sounds beautiful. I hope you will send us the transcript. What wants to reveal itself, what wants to unfold amidst all this chaos. Friends, I have some slides today, but before I get into slides, I just want to share context of where I'm coming from. I'm sure some of you can immediately tell by my accent and my skin color and my hair color that I come from India. I spent 21 years of my life there before I came here to do my PhD in environmental sciences. And you must have heard what a calamity India went through with the second wave of COVID. Yeah. And for me, that is emblematic of what these combined crises, you know, the ecological destruction, unraveling these viruses and microbes that were supposed to be in wildlife, and combined with right-wing governments, what they do to us, combined with the racism that unfolds at the global level, how corporations and patent rights impact global south. It was like global north and the ecological crisis had its knee on my people's neck. Yeah, you know that metaphor from George Floyd's death, right? Those 6 weeks between April, May, June, I have told many of you who've heard me speak before, were the hardest of my life, hardest 6 weeks of my life. I saw my people dying without oxygen and steroids, these medicines that India is the largest manufacturer of. The calamity came like this. It was like bang, bang, bang. These were the kind of calamities that climate scientists and ecologists have said would come in 10 years or 20 years, right? It's right here, right here. And so that's the context that I have been emerging from, and I'm happy to report that I have emerged. When it was happening, it felt endless. It felt helplessness inducing. I am going to talk about it. I was totally traumatized. I was what I call out of my windows of tolerance. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the whole thing I'm going to talk about, if you end up stopping listening to this talk right now, is importance of friendships. How crucial friendships are if we are to navigate what is happening, what is unraveling, and create islands of sanity in a sea of chaos. Yeah. What happened in India was totally traumatic, totally chaotic. Government was out of control, no infrastructure, you know, medical infrastructure failed, transport systems failed. Even if other countries sent oxygen to India, they sat at New Delhi airport for weeks. Our transport system failed, right? And what carried people through, people who survived, was friendships. Okay, so I'm going to talk about friendships at multiple levels and how friendships help us release our trauma, grieve, and also have pleasure and joy amidst this madness. So all of that, the whole spectrum. Today, I am venturing not just into grief, but also pleasure and joy. That's a new mantra for me too. And I believe it's so important, especially for people who have been historically marginalized and oppressed, that we have time to celebrate who we have been, who we are amidst the madness. Okay, so I'll share my slides. Maybe someone can do a thumbs up to tell me that it's showing up right on your screen.
It's good.
It's good. Thank you. Thank you, Roshi.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So all of this, as I said, is about trauma-informed activism, right? Grief, pleasure, windows of tolerance within the context of sustained friendships. The first thing here I want to say is, as a climate scientist, 10 years ago when I used to talk about climate grief, not too many people were keen on hearing about it, or it felt like a new concept. Now, the media is full of news articles on climate grief. I myself was interviewed by New York Times recently, and the journalist had such beautiful, deep questions about it. And the number I want to put out for you as right now, 70% of Americans in North America are extremely, or at least somewhat, anxious about climate. This is from late last year. And this is, I must say, a huge change, because the language around climate grief and climate trauma didn't exist a few years ago, as I was saying. The crucial point that has taken me some time to arrive at is that this climate grief, or the impact of climate on marginalized community, grief associated with that doesn't exist in isolation. It interacts with just layers of trauma, right? And when I share these numbers with people, there is this shared sense of swimming in sea of trauma. 1 in 3 children in United States, the statistics from elsewhere is as bad or worse. 1 in 3 kids have faced domestic violence. 1 in 4 kids in America have been beaten up to the point they have marks on their bodies. In America, 20% of kids were sexually molested, according to data we do have. But if you think about a place like India, that number is 50, 60% at least. And so I hope that image sticks with you. The climate grief that we talk about is on top of all of this, right? The racial trauma, the gender-based violence, the class, the economic misery, that stress, all of those are layered on top of the trauma we've faced as children. And so I always say that we are either traumatized deeply ourselves. Yes, it might not be outright rape or war-related violence, but we've faced all these injuries, stresses in our life, and then on top of it, there's everything else. And so what does this trauma do to us? Why is this relevant to our activism? It's the unspoken elephant in every room, every activist gathering, every meeting that I enter into as a climate advocate, as an activist, change maker, healer. It's there in every room, right? What does all this trauma do to us? Here I'm going to introduce to you the concept of windows of tolerance. Some of you might be very familiar with it. What we ideally want is that we are in what is called comfort zone, right? Our baseline state under ideal conditions should be a place where we have sense of content, we are confident, we feel relaxed, we can express and feel gratitude. Hopefully that is our home base, right? That isn't always the case that we feel safety and love, but if we are not in this zone, we actually don't hear each other well. Yeah. Now, what are the symptoms of it? Those of you who do mindfulness, you probably already know when we are in comfort zone, we take naturally deep abdominal breaths, right? We breathe from our abdomens. We make a lot of eye contact with people, right? There is good amount of circulation of blood in our skin, hands, feet. Our digestion is good, immune system is good, and we sleep well over the long term. Now, what happens when we are faced with dangers? Evolutionarily speaking, evolution said you need to run if there is tiger or snake around, right? In modern times, this might be facing police, right? For some of us anyway, that appearance of a police officer can create anxiety, fear, hypervigilance. And so what are the symptoms of this zone? As you can imagine, it increases our heart rate, blood pressure, our mouth dries out. You must have observed in meetings, some people, in spite of however much water they drink, they're always, the mouth is drying out, their pupil size changes, they're sweating. All of this, the evolution, the panic mode is not necessarily bad in itself. Its purpose was that body get ready to run and fight, right? The problem is that when you always stay in panic mode, your immune system is compromised, your digestion is compromised. And frankly, that's what people of color face when they are oppressed over decades and centuries, right? There is chronic health issues among marginalized communities. So in this mode, as I was hinting earlier, immune system response decreases, ability to relate and listen to each other decreases, and digestion goes bad. Now, all of this is not necessarily bad. You know, some of it we need for being productive. You can imagine running requires some of these things to kick up. Sexual activity requires some of this to kick up, right? The problem is how widespread this has become and how one person or some set of people always stay in it, and how with climate crisis and what's been happening on our planet, how all of us have entered this mode almost, you know, instead of being in comfort zone as our baseline, we are in panic zone as our baseline. So instead of the green zone, we stay in the red zone a lot, right? Being in red zone is out of that window of tolerance. The green zone is window of tolerance when we are able to hear each other, be creative, listen to each other. And then there is the third zone, which we are calling the numbness mode, right? Where we, instead of being hyperactive, we are hypoactive. There is exhaustion, there is depression, there is absence of emotion, lack of appetite. I hope everyone is still with me. Yeah. And then this, in this mode, we are immobilized and heart rate decreases, blood pressure decreases, temperature decreases, eye contact decreases, all of this. Once again, just like in panic mode, where we were in fight or flight, here we are in freeze, dysfunctional. Once again, not able to relate to each other, not able to be creative, right? So once again, you are seeing green is the window of tolerance, red is the panic zone, blue is the numbness zone. And where we want to be coming to our friendships, we want those support structures, our meditation practice, our grief work, our pleasure work, our activism, all of it together, right? All of it together, so necessary to keep us in that window of tolerance, so we can keep making sense of this world, where we can enter deep surrender that is needed to get guidance from the other realms, so to speak, right? All of our intelligence, in some way, sometimes it feels to me, has brought us where we are, where we were just thinking and thinking. Maybe I feel like there is a kind of relaxation of our combined nervous systems that is needed for us to drop into mystery and ask the universe for guidance, regardless of what your belief system is. I feel that we need to. It's almost like, let's bring in the comfort zone. Let's get into that neurological ease where we can get the guidance that the universe must be sending us collectively. So coming back to where do we go from here? There is no group of non-traumatized individuals outside of us that is going to lead the movement. It's you and me, right? With all of the trauma that my people and I went through in those 6 weeks, I got to be back. How did I get to come back? With the help of my friends that I'm going to talk about, right? This depth of trauma, unless it's resolved, it perpetuates. If we don't stop the cycle of trauma, of inducing harm, we give it to next generation, and we don't have the time to do it. One-on-one professional psychotherapy, it has helped me greatly, but it's not going to be enough. We need communities, we need friendships, we need tools within our communities of care to be able to do this. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about this relationship between how does climate grief interact with racial trauma? If you've been following literature and articles on climate grief, you might have come across this debate that's unfolding in the community, the work that reconnects practitioners and beyond, that, listen, this climate grief that you all are talking about, does everyone experience it equally? What's the experience of people of color, of Black people, of Asian people, of people who've always been poor and have always lived in polluted neighborhoods? And the one quote that captures my understanding of where we are in this debate is that climate anxiety or climate grief, that term itself is more applicable to people who haven't experienced existential threats before. Yeah, communities that have experienced colonialism, slavery, genocide, dispossession, all of these things, they tend to view climate crisis as just another layer of threat, compounding these long-standing forms of oppression. And this really shows up when I lead grief circles, right? A group of friends call me and say, let's do a grief circle around climate crisis. Early on, I used to get so shocked at how different people from different backgrounds, racial and class backgrounds, are expressing their grief or not. that sensitivity has taken time to take root in me, that and this quote captures it, that people with privilege are seeing climate crisis an existential threat when people of color have felt this for decades, centuries, historically. Of course, needless to say, and I'm sure Heather might have brought this up, that climate crisis is slated to be the biggest threat for oppressed communities if we don't act radically. It's true that people of color see that climate crisis as just another layer, but I think it's clear I hope it's clear for the audience here today, all of us, that lack of action is going to impact people of color the most, even if historically speaking, some of people of color only see that as another layer. So in terms of coming back to windows of tolerance, I would say my mantra has been, yes, we need gatherings like this, where we look at these issues together in 50s, 100s, 200, 500 people coming together, reading news articles, looking at vision and philosophy of different environmental groups, nonprofit groups that are working for justice and peace. But at our community levels, at our individual levels, like Heather was talking about, deep listening, accountability. For that, we need small group work. And I'm going to go further than what is on these slides. I hope all of you already engage in meditation practices. Science says that deep, long abdominal exhalations, more than 6 a minute, might be one of the simplest ways to come back to window of tolerance, that green zone. Yeah. And Upaya hosts these symposium. Is that Varela symposiums, Joan, if I'm saying that right? I'm sure that go deep into this, right?
Yes.
The mindfulness, calm and neutral sensations, singing, humming, chanting, those things that also, it is not surprising that they also bring joy and pleasure, but they help us get us into windows of tolerance. There's foot massage, safe memories, accessing those safe memories and connecting with how those safe memories make us feel, and social connection and laughter. In the long term, meditation retreats, trauma therapies, EMDR, IFS, somatic experiencing, community grief work. At the base of all this, is presence of friends. I think doing these, I'm sure all of us who've done psychotherapy knows that if you don't feel a trusting connection with your therapist, the person who's hearing your grief, if you don't feel like they're really listening to you, they are with you when you're expressing your pain, it won't go anywhere. And the cycle of deepening the friendships starts with vulnerability, right? I cannot emphasize it enough that Brené Brown is a social scientist who's been speaking powerfully. She has these amazing TED Talks on YouTube that you can go to, where she just says, we are also hungry for friendships and connection, but the way to get to that connection is so hard for us, all of us in modern societies, but especially for privileged white people gotten in the white bubbles. We have forgotten how to be vulnerable or authentic and really speak our truths. What's really happening, as opposed to the story I want you to take away about me. And healthy diets are a part of it. And as Dakila was pointing out earlier today, show up. Empowering actions are part of coming to our window of tolerance. We don't have to take these actions for other people. Empowering actions help our nervous system, right? If we are true and authentic to ourselves and really dropping into what's really happening for us, if we are the interconnected self Buddha said we are, right? I am you and you are me. The pain of me and the pain of tree in your neighborhood and the river that flows by, if all of that is ours, acting for their safety helps my nervous system on multiple levels: neurological, spiritual, political. I'm going to end soon, just a couple of slides more. This is the second last slide. This quote from my dear friend Eric Holtas, who says, climate grief or climate anxiety without justice is a gateway to fascism. Okay? Our job as the climate anxious, or those who grieve what's happening to our climate and our earth, is to repair that oppression, repair that marginalization, to make sure we are not offloading our anxiety, if we are in the privileged circles, onto someone else in ways that are causing more harm. I hope that, to me, that lands as very powerful and important, you know, as more and more chaos hits us, if and when it's not a question of when, it's a question of when our food systems collapse because there is extreme drought or extreme flooding, right? Are we just going to take care of a few people? Are we going to close our door to more and more refugees? Already been happening. How will we stop ourselves from descending into that eco-fascism? Yes, our pain would be real. Our anxiety about what's going to happen to our immediate near and dear ones is real. It was real for me when India was going through that chaos and collapse. But we're gonna need a lot of spiritual work with our friends who keep us accountable. Self-accountability, as Heather was pointing about, doesn't just appear in vacuum. It appears in relationships. My friends help me keep accountable. Yeah. And one thing that I like to say in the context of trauma-informed actions, trauma-informed community building, is that we need to say our truth. And the question is not necessarily always what privilege people deserve to hear, but what they also need to grieve. Sometimes what coming in the way of some people taking powerful actions is that they are so much in fight and flight when we tell them our truth that they are not in their windows of tolerance. They don't release their stress, they don't grieve, and they don't get to act. So the trauma-informed lens has so many ramifications that I hope we'll get into in our question and answer session. I want to end with this last slide. Trauma and shame, right? Two sides of the coin, plus the fear of uncertainty that we are all in if we think about what's happening to our planet. That adds to our fight, flight, and freeze mind. That gets us out of windows of tolerance. That's the case I have been making. And that's on top of all of our individual childhood trauma, our intergenerational trauma, cultural trauma we might hold as people of particular racial backgrounds. Jews have Holocaust trauma alive in them all the time. There's class trauma. All of these things, if we are not careful, they lead to dominance mindset as opposed to connection, right? Buddhism teaches us there is interbeing, I am you, you are me, but all of these traumas end up giving us a dominance mindset. When I don't belong, then I want to dominate you, right? And that becomes an engine of oppression. So it is our sacred duty, divine duty, spiritual duty to take care of our nervous systems and to take care of nervous system of our friends. Because if we don't do that, we end up participating consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously in the engines of oppression, right? And the engine of oppression further traumatizes us. So the work that we do at the very fundamental level on our own nervous system and then of our friends is so crucial, so crucial. But we don't have to stop there. As Dakila was saying so powerfully in the last session, meditation, contemplation, self-introspection, crucial. Buddhism has given us amazing toolbox, and empowering actions have to be part of the equation. You will all get these slides. I'm just ending with a few resources on some of the things I've been involved in. So I'm gonna stop the slide share now. And take comments before we open up. One thing that I didn't have in my slides that I'm passionate about, and I mentioned in my Dharma talk 2-3 days ago, is that I really believe in sustained friendships to carry this work forward. And that magic number of friends for me is 5 to 8. We do things in large groups, as I was talking about, learn from different sources. But when it comes to digesting these materials, whether it's the news about the new climate catastrophe, new kinds of racial injustice related news, the indigenous children graves that were found, we need an ongoing group of friends. Very fierce advocate of ongoing friendships. Please come back to same group if you can, to process these things, to express that grief, that release that stress, and come back to window of tolerance to take creative, strategic actions together, right? If we are alone with these bombardment of these news, we get paralyzed, we get into numbness zone, right? So I wanted to end by highlighting that number, 5 to 8 friends meeting every 2 weeks, something like that. That's the mantra. So thank you. I'm going to end here and open it up.
Kritee, thank you so much. This work is such brave work. And being able to, find the space within oneself to have that strong back, soft front, that paradigm of practice I offer so often, of really touching the truth of our own suffering. I'm really curious about this landscape that you have articulated for us this afternoon. You work with climate scientists every day, and I'm wondering how receptive those in the world of climate science are to actually acknowledging their grief.
It has shifted dramatically in last few years. 5, 6, 7 years ago, my climate scientist colleagues used to say, I'm having panic attacks at night. You see, climate scientists get the news that the people who are not scientists see 5, 6, 7 years before you see it. We see the research happening, it gets published, then it gets in popular media, right? But people were not, my scientist friends were not talking about it openly. It was like we were closeted in our grief. And now given there has been so much vocabulary about eco-anxiety, climate grief, even climate trauma, people are feeling open. Last couple of years, we've had gatherings within our mainstream organization talking about grief, right? Open sessions. And there is openness to talking about trauma-informed lens to our work. Because people who work in the climate science field or policy making field, we bear the brunt every day, right? And it's the same as social justice activists. If you are a Black Lives Matter activist, you are hearing the stories of people getting killed before other people do, right? So the vocabulary is entering there. People do not yet have the tools they need to manage that grief. So the acknowledgement is coming, but the healing, the pathways to manage that grief, those are just beginning to be talked about. And my appeal, therefore, to my Buddhist colleagues, teachers, is to have more forums like this where we can reach out into the wider network, right? And help not just people who are Buddhist, but also non-Buddhist, and just have these tools that Buddhism and associated traditions give us.
Oh, wonderful. I don't know if is Dekila on still with us, Noah? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Let me see.
I think she's here.
Yes, she is. Yeah. Let me just make her.
Yeah.
Co-host.
So before we open up to questions with Kadiha and Shirley and Marianne, Dekila, I know you also have thought a lot about and been subject to this, the experience of climate grief. Could you take a moment and just reflect on, what you've learned from facing that in your life?
I'm really happy to. Hi, Kritee. I love it when we get to intersect and be in the same spaces. I think the term that I first came across, I was talking earlier about having experienced what we now use, what we now know is referred to as eco-anxiety and climate grief. The first experience I had was in 2006, where I started having panic attacks. I was based in Laos at that time, and I was working on climate change and hydropower, two very difficult topics, and trying to get the governments to actually leave the Mekong River free flowing. The Mekong is the second most biodiverse river. For those of you who don't know it, Google it. It's gorgeous, a beautiful, rich red color. And there were these added elements that I did not, so I and my peers were all experiencing panic. Everything Kritee said really resonates, right? That we are the first ones. For me, it was being in the forest and knowing that I was in forests that were effectively dead. And that while they were living in the moment, that in 5 years, they would not be there. And so you are grieving even as you're experiencing something that you absolutely love. But what was interesting was I was seeing a lot of differences depending on the type of community you came from and what Kritee referred to, which is what other kinds of suffering you've experienced before and trauma. One thing that has been really useful for me, I know I brought it up in previous Upaya talks, is the work by Glenn Albrecht, who is an Australian philosopher. And he uses a term called solastalgia that has really resonated with me because I think that speaks specifically to Indigenous people. And so for people who are really, have, as I described in my talk, talking about from the perspective of indigeneity, what happens because we see the world and nature as being alive spiritually and in real terms. So for people who really see nature as being alive, there is this deeper sense of loss, right? And what's interesting is that more recent research shows that it's not just Indigenous people, it's also people who, for example, are farmers, people whose sense of identity expands beyond their body. and sort of has, you know, gone out of what we think of as ourself, has gone in and selected either a river or a tribe or what's the word I want to use, a species, or, you know, sometimes even the planet, right? And that what they are, the type of grief that they're experiencing has multi-layers to it. So I'm sure Kritee does this too. What I find is that I now refer to eco-anxiety, climate grief, and solastalgia as 3 different kinds of emotional and psychological distress. And what we see, especially working with the students at UW-Madison, is that young people in particular resonate with eco-anxiety. You know, it's got all the symptoms that anxiety does, sort of the frenetic energy, right? The desire to immediately move to action, anger, no patience, you know, the resistance to waiting or thinking or contemplating, but wanting to act immediately. So we see this particularly among young people, not surprisingly. The climate grief seems to be, interestingly, with the older generation, and also quite a bit with environmentalists. You know, everyone who identifies as an environmentalist is in a free fall of grief right now, and has been for a long time. And I think the thing that compounds it, which Kritee mentioned, which I was completely getting emotional listening to, was it's sort of like the Cassandra effect, that you have been shouting this from the top of the roof for decades, right? And no one has been listening. And we've been saying, it's coming, the flood is rising, it's rising, and no one is paying attention. And when the disaster comes, you know, that's when suddenly everyone wants you to speak, or everyone wants to listen to environmentalists. But even then, it's to kind of shove us through this funnel that works for everyone else. So I think the one thing I would love to add to what Kritee said was, you know, there's the debates that are going on in the environmental community. We are as subject to dualism as any other group. And one of them has been that we've been forced into like the mitigation or the adaptation camp. You know, the camp where you really have to be cheerful and say technology will solve everything and kumbaya. And then the camp that's like, wait, our most marginalized are in trouble. We are not so worried about mitigation because we have to work on adaptation because the crisis is here. And I think for us, I mean, I don't want to speak for Kritee, but for us, the reality is, how are we walking, holding these 2 things and finding balance between the 2 worlds?
Thank you, Dekila. You both have really been, you know, in the field of this for so long. You know, there's one other valence that I just want to mention, which I've been writing about, and that is the experience of moral suffering. That, you know, every plastic bag or every plane we get on, or building a structure, you know, just our footprint on the world with just being alive. But now it's at a magnitude where there is no way that we don't feel at even the preconscious level some sense of that we we're caught in the grip of moral suffering. And I would suggest that, you know, it's not just our country. This is something, even those who are not aware of it, just not being aware of grief, for example, or not being aware of climate anxiety and the behaviors that come out of both of these experiences. But this also pertains to the experience of moral suffering, where we feel part of the system of violence and not able to actually withdraw ourselves from the system of violence. Anyway, the 3 of us have stirred on these questions, as I think all of you are aware of. What I'd like to do is to open up for questions. I'm going to ask for our wonderful questioners, including, it's great to see you, Shirley. I'm going to ask you to speak first, and if you will just go to essence, so that we can have Jennifer, Khadija, and Marianne all have a chance to speak. And, you know, we'll respond to the extent that we're able in a succinct way. Shirley. I think you're muted. So you need to ask to unmute. Noah, can you unmute,
Yeah.
Shirley? Yeah, okay. You're
Yeah,
good.
I got unmuted. Thank you. Thank you for your talk. From the seat of the privileged person sitting in my air-conditioned home with a refrigerator full of food. Sorry about the dog. She heard food. I have a question about comfort. I was wondering if you see any aspect of moving out of comfort as positive in terms of a trigger, an incentive to take action.
Yeah, I think there's the difference between comfort and comfort zone. In some ways, those of us who can regulate the temperature of our rooms, we are too comfortable to care about change, to invest in change making. But what I was talking about was sort of comfort zone, where the neurological system is in comfort, so to speak, and can be engaged. Maybe we should call it engaged zone. And I know there's different vocabulary for it. And sometimes actually people phrase the band between the space between the green band and the red band, where we are in growth zone, is actually the place where things happen. So you're not too comfortable, but you're also not in panic. So some people say that's the growth zone where things happen. Most public speakers know that. If you are totally relaxed, you are not being impactful. If you're totally in panic, you forget what you really wanted to say. There is an edge, right? So maybe that's what you're speaking to. We definitely need to be out of our comfort zones in that way, right? Those of us who are privileged. I hope that makes sense.
Much appreciated for the clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, Shirley. George Crusos, who's an endocrinologist, has written extensively about these two forms of stress. There is distress, which produces dysfunction, and there's eustress, EU stress, which actually our bones need, our muscles need, our hearts need, and our psyches need. So, it is not to say, and I think Kritee's point is very important. We have to understand, what is, and be not averse toward difficulty. In fact, rites of passage are a good example of putting, an initiate or someone going through a profound phase shift, including the experience of loss and grief, where ultimately it becomes generative. And I think that's what Terry Tempest Williams is addressing in this beautiful piece she did. It was actually about the coronavirus, but it applies. She's very deep into, the work that, you all are doing and that we care about. How unraveling allows us to really weave a new cloth. But it can seem so threatening that we arrest the process before a reconstitution can take place. And so, it's like this trauma averse, so to speak, attitude has its challenges that, just like people who are averse to grief and the work that Kritee is doing, or how we use the experience of anxiety as, to produce a sufficient arousal level where we take action instead of being dominated by anxiety and the toy of anxiety. Anyway, we all could have a lot to say at that, but I want to get on to the other questions. And let's just see, I'm going to ask Jennifer if you would share.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is a question.
Thank you, Shirley.
This is a question for potentially all three of you, Kritee, Dekela, and Rishi Joan. So we talked earlier about kind of like root cause of what's going on with climate change, relating largely back to capitalism. And I'm just kind of keying off of what Kritee was talking about with the role that spirituality and Buddhism can play in healing and then what Dakila was talking about with the interfaith groups that she's working with. And I'm wondering, as Buddhist practitioners and more broadly spiritual leaders, what kind of role do we have to play in not just the healing, but really leading the transformation of potentially like this deep psychology and values that need to change? And I'm also thinking about like indigenous spirituality, which I'm trying to learn more about as well.
Beautiful. Ladies?
Dakila, I'm just offering you to go first. I can add on. I can see you on my screen.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm not shy or too deferential, obviously. I think one of the most important things that we can really address has to do with view. How we see the world, how we actually describe, quotes, reality. If you understand that there's no separate self-identity, an inherent self, and you have an inactive view, a la the work of Francisco Varela, where you begin to see that you and the environment are not separate, that you're shaping the environment is shaping you. This is a basic Buddhist perspective, and it comes from deep, deep practice. So I just, for me, it really boils down to view and how we open up a perspective that is more reality-based and not based, if you will, on distorted perceptions of reality.
I'll jump in here, and I absolutely agree. The right view, right? Right view is so important, and Buddhism gives us that theoretical framework. What I have found sometimes is that Buddhism hasn't always given me, and I'll address a question that came in the chat to me about importance of 5 to 8 friends. Why do I keep saying that again and again? What I think Buddhism didn't give me, maybe I just didn't hear the right people, I'm beginning to hear them now, was how does that view of interdependence and interbeing, how does that translate into my daily life? How do I relate to capitalism, the structures, the economy, right? How do I look at it and how do I change it? And the reason I come back, the answers that I was looking for didn't come from Buddhism, but from a field that I called social permaculture, where these teachers have learned from indigenous people and ecosystems and say, how are ecosystems behaving? When do ecosystems stay healthy versus when they degrade? And it is from these people in social permaculture field where I have realized that you need to really slow things down. Buddhist practices slowed me down to do enough meditation, right? 10 retreats a year, 5 days every retreat, on and on. But when I jumped out of my retreat life and my temple life, things fall apart, especially when interfacing with the capitalist system. And these 5 to 8 friends that I speak about, that is different from Sangha. Someone asked me, how is it different from having Sangha? Sanghas sometimes might be very small, but when Sanghas get big, we don't get enough of these dyadic interactions which can really heal us. We can be in a large group feeling completely unseen, unheard. And the importance of small groups is that if they are healthy, if they do enough feedback and conflict resolution within themselves, it's very important not to just to be with friends, we become conflict averse and feedback averse. If we have healthy ecosystems there, we can heal, we can feel seen, and we can take creative actions together. I hope that made sense. I pivoted, combined 2 questions here.
I think what I'd add, so, earlier I gave all kinds of examples of practical action that faith leaders are doing and religious institutions are doing. Some of you might have seen the bullet where I pointed out that the Catholic Church is the 2nd or 3rd wealthiest property owner in the world. So when you think in practical terms, in terms of footprint, of course, religion and faith leaders have an enormous practical part to play. But I think there's a much, going back to what Roshi and Kritee both mentioned, I think there's also a deeper gap. There is an emptiness, there's an absence actually right now that we are seeing, not just in terms of morality or leadership, but we are seeing in terms of the tapestry of what society is, right? And I think that has a lot to do, the question I get asked the most, I don't know, maybe it's the same for Kritee, is about hope. Every single time people want to ask me, do I have hope? How do I have hope? Why do I have hope? They want me to pass on via osmosis hope. And what I've started saying in the last few years is actually hope is not the emotion we need. What we need is courage. Hope is very distracting. Hope makes us very vulnerable to the ebbs and flows and the jaggedness of falling up and down and standing at the edge, right? Hope is us just sort of jumping off without a parachute, hoping a parachute comes along. What we need is a really sustained courage. And I think the role that faith leaders can play is providing that courage for people, because we are at a point where we as scientists are saying, we don't know what's coming. Just the last 3 weeks, honestly, if you are on science Twitter, the only conversation we're having is, we didn't expect it to be this bad this quickly. We all expected this point to come in 10 years. And we are all sitting there aghast because our data didn't show that. Because, Jem Bendel, some of you might know who he is, has pointed out again and again that we have our own biases as scientists. We want things to be positive. We dread being the bearer of bad news. So we tweak our data to match that. We're already anticipating negative reaction and kind of softening the blow, right? And what the reality is showing us, when you think about the fires and the ocean going on fire and everything else that we've been all listening to and watching in the last few weeks, is that we're not ready. We're not ready spiritually, we're not ready emotionally, and we're not ready practically. And when faith leaders come to me and say, what is the best thing I can do? It's, well, help us be ready. The thing that we need for the next generation, for example, to survive, what is the quality we need to pass on to the next generation? Adaptability in the face of uncertainty, right? Everything is uncertain. And so, my assumption is faith leaders have done the inner work, that they're comfortable with uncertainty. But besides that, right, what is it that faith leaders can provide to everyone else? It's that understanding that uncertainty is okay. It's that understanding that we will manage somehow, that we as a community and as a collective are stronger than individuals, right? And I think that pushing back on this idea that individualism is going to get us through is key. That's all I'm writing about these days. That's all I talk about these days, is this idea that John Wayne is going to come riding in and save that community. Because it turns out John Wayne is not the good guy, and that mayor is basically Exxon. And so how does the community self-empower and find the courage to respond, right? How do we energize and build that community? It's a lot of work, and I really appreciate all the faith leaders, including Roshi and Kritee and everyone else who does it.
Tequila, thank you. Kritee. I want to invite Marianne, please, to reflect for a moment, and then Khadija, but be succinct because we're going to have a short break, and then Rhonda.
Thank you, Roshi. I wanted to thank our presenters so much for bringing to the fore, and I realize that hope may not be the primary concern at this point or priority, but as somebody who was part of a movement 30 years ago that knew about the psychological and the physiological impact of trauma on people's lives, and who did their best to work on policy and other issues around this, but without benefit of knowing how to deal with each other's trauma in the process of bringing that to the fore. I thank you. We didn't some of us did not have the tools that you're speaking of. I don't think any of us had the tools that you're speaking of that made it possible for a movement to survive in the face of backlash. It was a pre-Me Too movement, and the backlash was very well moneyed. And we didn't survive it in part because we didn't know how to deal with the dynamics among each other that we brought to activism as a result of our backgrounds. And the other piece is I've seen this happen in sanghas as well. And I don't mean to make a gross generalization, but where the layers of trauma, where the layers of trauma are not safe to talk about in the context of activism, even in a Buddhist perspective, where I've seen marginalization. I've actually felt it myself, which in part may be the result of skillful means of communicating it. But I just want to make clear how important your work is. And gratified is the wrong word because it sounds condescending, but it is so wonderful to see the trajectory of the work that much of which no one knows about, but in some way in the background has contributed to the tremendous understandings and contributions you've made today.
Marianne, thank you so much. And Kariha, if you could just really go to essence, because we want to give enough time to Rhonda.
Okay, I want to say a few stuff related to what Kritee said about climate grief. The thing is that I have a journal. Okay, it has a lot of newspapers in it, and each newspaper I paste gets me emotional. Like, what's happening in our world? Why is it happening? Like the kid said, she referred to the forest part, right? Where she says everything is degraded
for so long.
Yeah, so you
and all of this is impacting the carbon footprint, right? So I'm saying, like, we're raising voices, people tend not to listen, like we're making up stories. This is a major problem. Like she said, we feel emotional, we hear about stuff going around the world, like climate change, global warming, you know, stuff like that.
Okay. Thank you, Kadiha. My dear friends, we've opened up a really important area. And Kritee, you've articulated it in terms of vulnerability and transparency to our own experience in relation to what we're facing now. So what I'd like to invite us to do is we're going to take a 3-minute stretch break. And it is 3:09, and we'll come, back with Rhonda at 3:12. And I'm going to ask us just not to log off, but to stay on and just take a breath. Just take a breath. Thank you so much, Dekila and Kritee and all of you.